The main point that I want to address with this video is the Wither's true power. People would say that the Wither alone could not cause a catastrophe, the kind of mass extinction of perhaps the player race that we see in the overworld now. The fact that there are no quote-unquote ancient players or ancient humans, ancient builders, whatever you want to call them, that the fact that they're just all missing. And people would say that the Wither alone cannot cause this catastrophe. But I think when we look at both the Wither's full immense power as well as looking at the Wither in context of when it might have occurred, we might be able to see why that the Wither's existence can indeed explain the catastrophic disaster that we see today. If we go back to the story that was developed at the end of the Great Nether Trade, I believe that some sort of war may have taken place between the Wither Skeletons and the Piglins, with the players aiding the Piglins, that would have caused the end of the Great Nether Trade. My theory describes both war and Wither for context. Wither Skeletons, or some sort of leader of theirs, began a war against the Piglin rule in the Nether, and they used the Wither at some point in order to attempt to seal their victory. So allow us to consider the introduction of the Wither, of course, in this context. Another reason one might frown upon the idea of the Wither being strong enough to wipe out a species is the fact that us real-life people can beat it single-handedly, even without the most late-game items. But the difference here is that we know how to kill it. Instead, imagine if you had to fight the Wither blind, if it suddenly spawned one night when you were just playing and the boss shows up near you. To our your players, you probably know what I'm talking about. I mean, would you know that it heals from killing other living things? That the flowers it plants on the ground would give you the Wither effect? That even the skulls it shoots would give you the Wither effect? Would you know that it spawns skeletons and it becomes immune to projectiles after losing half its health? Would you realize that the undead were not burning if the fight was lasting long enough? I mean, how long would it take all of us to figure out each of these different things in regards to the Wither? That is the kind of challenge that the ancient people were faced with. If they had to deal with the Wither with an army over multiple days, how were they going to be figuring out all these different things over time without spending a lot of resources, without lots of casualties? These are very minute details that, would be crazy to try and figure out in the heat of battle without having the best means of communicating with other people in order to spread that information, in order to better coordinate attacks against the Wither. And then on top of all of this, we don't even really know how many Withers were spawned at the time. I mean, if we're dealing with an army of Wither Skeletons, and we have the Soul Sand Valley as, large wastes of soul sand, we can't really suggest that there may not have been an abundance of Wither Skeleton skulls and soul sand available to actually just create Withers on the fly. You just have multiple Withers existing in both dimensions, at any given point in time. So even if one Wither may not be strong enough, we could be still dealing with, multiple tens or hundreds of Withers that may have been spawned at the time in order to win this war. If we're talking about an organized war between factions, we could very well be dealing with a very organized plot to collect fallen soldiers and create Withers and use those to continue the push. I mean, I don't see why that would be unreasonable, why we might just only be dealing with one or two Withers, but there could have been plenty of Withers spawned in both dimensions, which would have been able to aid in this extinction and destruction that we see in both of these dimensions. So when looked at in a vacuum, the Wither may seem rather manageable, but if you look at it within the full context of the story, of the war, of the undead, of the overworld, and the Nether, one can tell that the Wither's existence may truly be the explanation to mass extinction that we see now in the overworld, and the wide destruction that we see in the Nether. Thus, in the next main episode, we may see how this extinction may inspire the next big chain of actions in the Minecraft story.